everyone. Welcome to Aldea, and here we are, just a few days before Christmas. So I'm going to figure that everyone has done all the shopping that they're trying to do, and has done all the cooking and baking and all the planning and inviting, and so you're all probably pretty stress-free at this point. Am I right in saying? Okay, that's what I thought. How many of you don't have work until Christmas? No? Oh, okay. How many of you don't have work ever? Good for you. Well, here we are, and just as we're getting ready for Christmas, as Terrell mentioned, we have a special Christmas Eve service in just 2 days from now on Tuesday at 3 p.m. And so in many ways, that service is going to stand on its own. And so today will be the conclusion of the series that we've been in throughout December, this journey of light that we've been on. See, December Lights has really been about exploring what are those lights that show up throughout the holidays, those symbols that find their way through diverse traditions and maybe different stories through the traditions that we are familiar with. So if you look behind me, there is our December Lights table, and it's gotten pretty crowded, which has been a really exciting journey. And so we started with the menorah and the kinara from Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, reminding us that sometimes the lighting of a candle can be an act of rededicating ourselves to something that is either culturally or spiritually valuable to us and finding our way back to it. We have the Yule log, which we explored on week 2, a symbol of lighting this fire in the midst of perhaps, like Cameron talked about, the darkest, coldest night of the year, and reminding us that we can create that warmth in the light of community, in the light of family, and the love that we create. And then last week, we have some magi up here as well, because last week we talked about the magi and the story of the magi and how there was a December light, probably not actually in December, but there was a light that showed up for them that compelled them on this journey. And we asked ourselves, what are the lights that are showing up for us, and how might we be courageous enough to follow them? And so today, as we close out this series, we find ourselves in this unique moment, I think a very fitting day, because as we already talked about, last night was the longest night of the year. Yesterday was the winter solstice. And today is the last Sunday of the Advent season. And when thinking about these two significant moments, there was a theme that struck me, a theme of expectation, of anticipation, of the waiting that we experience in life. See, if the solstice is this signal and this marker for the light to return to us, then it is something that we have an anticipation and an expectation for. We have Advent, which in many ways is the counting down to Christmas, right? There's a sense of expecting and waiting for something. We even have New Year's Eve coming up, which has within it a very literal countdown to something new, to a big shift, a big transition. And so this theme of counting down shows up a lot throughout the holidays. And certainly, it shows up right smack dab in the middle of the Christmas story, which in many ways revolves around an expectant mother. So in this season, not just in this season on our planet, but in this season in your life, where has the waiting been? Where is that anticipation showing up? And maybe today, Our journey together will be an exploration about how this season and how Advent can be a reminder that waiting doesn't have to be a problem, right? It can be part of the human experience that teaches us something. Or as Irish poet Pádraig Ó Tuama says, Advent reminds us that waiting is not passive, but full of potential, a time to prepare our hearts for the world we long to see. How many of us grew up with some form of an Advent calendar? Now, recently, I feel like the Advent calendar has become adapted to a more modern audience and kind of pushed the boundaries of what an Advent calendar should be. And maybe even it has extended beyond the human species. I know for our Advent calendar this year, we have our Advent calendar for dogs, Trader Joe's Advent calendar for dogs, which not only is... It's wonderful, and not only is it a ton of fun for the humans because there's all these sweet messages on there, but of course it's a ton of fun for the animals because those are the treats. That's the backside. So, but then you might be thinking, why do the animals get all the treats? Is there an Advent calendar for me? I like treats as well. Well, you might not be able to tell because this Advent calendar looks pretty normal from afar, but this is an Advent calendar purely comprised of pork rinds, of crispy pork snacks. So if you're like me and you're thinking, nothing speaks to the holidays like a daily crispy pork rind, then this Advent calendar from the Snuffling Pig Co. may be for you. Lastly, I found this in my research, as I go into deep study looking for these really bizarre Advent calendars. I found what I think to be the most bizarre Advent calendar I've found in my life yet. And that is the Buff Santa Advent calendar. If you can't see, it's, yeah. I don't know who asked for this, but if you're in this room and you think this is the exact Advent calendar that I've been wanting, then you can buy it through my link and I get 10 cents. No, I'm just kidding. But the thing about these unique and interesting and bizarre Advent calendars, or maybe a more traditional one, maybe you have one at home that just has chocolate, a nice classic, right? The thing is we like to make the waiting more interesting, right? We like to make the anticipation a little more fun, because how many of us know that the waiting, as our friend Tom Petty reminds us, the waiting is the hardest part. I have this memory of a Christmas Eve. When I was a kid, we had this tradition where you could open like one present on Christmas Eve and then we'd open the rest on Christmas morning. And I have this one memory of this particular Christmas Eve, probably 8 years old. And I went for that one present and then I couldn't stop myself on Christmas Eve. And I went for the second present and I kept going and I opened all my presents on Christmas Eve. And then the next day I woke up and my cousins were opening all their presents and I had gone through mine already, and I just felt this shame. Maybe for the first time in my life, I was like, who are you? What is going on? Like, what have you become? What have you allowed yourself? You've just given in to this horrible, And so I've kind of learned, we see this show up throughout our lives, that there's such a thing as a good waiting, right? As a patience and as a ability to delay gratification in order to create some better outcomes for ourselves. And in fact, social psychologists study this ability to be patient and to delay gratification as a marker for how we approach many situations in life. And sometimes they study this in children. There's a test you might know about called the marshmallow test. And if you do not, I'm going to show a little clip on some of the studies that go on around this.
The marshmallow test is a really great way to show how children delay gratification. We tried it out with the 4 children we've been following since September 2010. Alfie, Millie, Mackay, and Pratmesh. Here's how it works. We had each child on their own sit at the table at a desk with a plate and 1 marshmallow. They could either choose to eat the marshmallow, the 1 marshmallow right then and there, or they could wait until I came back into the room and have 2 marshmallows. I left them alone in the room for 15 minutes. Take a look. The marshmallow test has been used for decades by psychologists. It's been used with children to predict later academic success, including literacy, SAT scores, and other academic outcomes. There's no definitive answers from the marshmallow test. It's not a matter of passing or failing. What we're looking for is whether children can really resist this piece of white candy sitting in front of them that's sweet, that, the smell of it, the allure of the marshmallow. In Pratmesh's case, we really saw this added curiosity because he had never actually tasted a marshmallow before. All of the children managed to show some level of self-control and resist the temptation to eat the whole marshmallow. As you can see from the footage, you can catch a glimpse into children's ability to control their impulses. This ability, which is developed around the time of kindergarten, can be linked to other outcomes later in life. At the end, the marshmallows were in kind of different states. Some had been squished, ripped apart, nibbled around. There was this temptation and there was this impulse to kind of try it out.
I like Mackay was like, I'm just gonna kind of smash it and get it out of my sight, and maybe that might make it easier. How many of us, when we see this, we can actually see ourselves in the plight of these children? See, we all have those marshmallows, those things that it can be hard to be patient for and to wait for, even if we know that there's something better for us around the corner. So we can all get on board with the fact that there is a good waiting that happens in life. But there also can be a bad waiting, because sometimes we hesitate, we wait, and then we miss opportunities, right? So sometimes waiting is not a good thing. An example I know in my own life, maybe you relate to this, to bring it back to Trader Joe's. We all know Trader Joe's has those seasonal snacks. And if you wait too long, that you go back next week, they're gone, right? So don't be like me. Don't wait to get that extra bag of Thanksgiving stuffing flavored kettle chips, because you're going to go back and they're going to be gone. So there's good waiting. There's bad waiting, and then there's just that waiting that we don't have any control over whatsoever, right? It's traffic, it's delayed flight. So waiting can hold all of these different meanings in our lives. Sometimes the motto in life is hurry up and wait, right? How many of you have experienced some version of this, right? I was, when I first started playing music, I was in music school, and yeah, they taught music theory, but they also taught you some practical life skills. And they said, hey, a lot of your life is going to be hurry up and wait, because you're going to show up somewhere, and then you're just going to have to wait around for a little bit. And that's just life. And there's a scenario in which I experience hurry up and wait a lot in, especially lately, and it's at the movie theater. I like to get to the movie theater early because I like the previews. I don't know if that makes me an outlier at all, but I enjoy the previews. And it's it used to be a love relationship with the previews. Now it's a love-hate relationship with the previews, because they've gotten so long that I've timed it, and it's now about a half hour of previews before the movie starts. That's the rest of this message today, is why the previews need to be shorter. So thank you, everyone. No, but it's ridiculous, and then if you've been to the AMC theaters specifically, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this. I don't know if I'm going to get this video taken down. But if you've been to the AMC theaters specifically in recent times, just when you think you can't wait any longer and you've seen all the previews that there possibly could be out there, then another commercial comes on with Nicole Kidman, and she goes, welcome to the AMC theater. And as if I'm like, you don't need to advertise the theater to me. I'm already here. You don't need to sell the movie-going experience. I'm at the movies. I don't know. It just grinds my gears, But anyway, how many of us, if we're being honest, okay, patience is not our strongest suit. That's true for myself. There's that phrase, patience is a virtue. It's like, yeah, obviously it is. I just don't have it, and that's okay. And here's the reality. We live in a culture that does not make it easier to develop patience, because our culture tries to close the gap between any kind of waiting that we would possibly do, whether it's same-day shipping or we get rid of commercials or whatever it is, right? We like to have things instantaneous. We like instant gratification. And so really the question in our culture, the way that we phrase it, is why would I even have to wait? And what could possibly be worth waiting for? And so that's really what I want to explore today, is if we're going to talk about waiting, what are we actually talking about? What are we waiting for? When it comes to Advent, this word comes from the Latin word adventus, which means arrival or coming. So it's the expectation and the anticipation of something on its way. And this shows up in Christmas. This shows up also in the solstice, right? With the sun and its arrival, and the arrival of eventually we move from the longest night into the longest day And so whatever arrival you're waiting for, or maybe it's just an arrival in your life and in your journey, the thing that these all have in common is that there is some kind of newness that is arriving. New life, new light, a new hope. And so maybe you're out there today and you're thinking, if this whole conversation is about the arrival of the baby Jesus, and maybe you're someone out there where you would say, that in and of itself is not all that meaningful to me. And what I would encourage you to today is to see this conversation around birth and arrival also from the context of symbol and of metaphor, that the birth of Christ can be seen as a picture for a new way of being in the world. That even as Jesus grows up, as a teacher, he is bringing about a new way of operating as human beings. So this new light, this new birth, this new hope brings about a new way of relating to one another and relating to our place in this world. Or as Reverend Sara Miles says, Advent is not about a sentimental waiting for the baby Jesus, but about the call to live into the world as it is being remade in love. And so we find ourselves on week 4 of our December Light series, and each week we've had a different December light. And so I got to be really careful with this, or else it could be a very different December light. But Jake becomes the December light. That's how but all right, being really careful. This is a real stripped down version of an Advent wreath. And the Advent wreath really, it marks the passage of time. It is with us during this liminal space of Advent, in that each of these candles represents 1 week of the Advent journey, that each Sunday of Advent, one of these candles is lit. The first Sunday, it is the candle of hope. The second, the candle of peace. The third, the candle of joy. And then very fitting for us today, as it is the last Sunday of Advent, the final candle is the candle of love. But for me, when I think about that countdown to Christmas, for most of my childhood, it wasn't that meaningful. It was just about waiting for the presents to show up. But for Mary, it was probably a lot different. It was about carrying her child, right? And it was about the expectation and the anticipation of this new life entering into her world and the world. And in many ways, birth is the quintessential weight of the human experience, right? We talk about expectation specifically in regards to expectant mothers, that's a huge connotation of that word. And so birth is the quintessential weight of the human experience. And if we're going to talk about the quintessential weight of the human experience, we might as well talk about the ultimate example of that. The longest labor in history happened in 2012, a 75-day labor by a woman in Poland who, during those 75 days, laid nearly upside down the entire time. But see, for there to be a healthy birth, there often needs to be a wait, right? In order for that life to be fully formed or to experience what it needs to experience in order to come into the world healthy, right? So you need a wait in order for there to be a birth. And that is true, friends, regardless if we're talking physically or spiritually or metaphorically, right? It doesn't have to be about a physical life. Think about in your life, what is birthing? Perhaps it is a dream. Perhaps it is something that you have been compelled to create. Perhaps it's a project at work, a relationship, or yes, even a human being that you have birthed, and that as you raise them and walk alongside them, continue to be a part of their own process of birthing themselves. But whatever it is, what all of these things have in common is that there is going to be a degree of waiting that happens. And friends, what happens when we pair waiting with expectation? It can sometimes get a little tricky, because as we wait, expectation builds. And as we know, expectations can sometimes be good, but also they can very often be bad. That expectations have the ability to ruin experiences sometimes. How many of us have gone on vacation and beforehand we were planning it out and we were thinking, this vacation is going to be the best vacation we have ever taken and it's going to save my family and, we need this vacation and it's going to be worth the $10,000 we're spending and it's going to make all my friends on social media jealous and it's going to be everything we need it to be. And then really, there's no amount of joy that you could possibly experience that's ever going to live up to the expectation in your head. And so it's always going to be a disappointment. We also hold these expectations on other people, and this can sometimes break relationships down, right? You are supposed to be this certain thing for me, right? You should do this, you shouldn't do that. Sometimes holding people to that can really ruin the dynamic of a relationship. And yet we do this to ourselves, right? We say, I should have been different, or this should not have happened to me, right? In some ways, we're even holding life to a set of expectations. Life was supposed to be this way, or life was not supposed to be this way. When we think about expectations in this context, right, there's something that makes it impossible for us to at the same time experience freedom. That it's very difficult for us to allow, let's say, another human being to be free and at the same time hold them to these types of expectations. But there is another type of expectation that can be healthy, that can be good for us. And maybe we might call this other form of expectation faith. See, I have faith that if yesterday was the winter solstice, I have faith that each day, starting today, is going to get a little bit longer and a little bit longer. Or I have faith that after this winter, it'll be spring, right? Because I think it's all right for me to have some healthy expectation in the cycles of nature. But there are also aspects of our relationships that we can have some healthy expectations. That if we're going to be vulnerable and depend on the people that we love, sometimes we're going to need to say, hey, I'm expecting you to show up and be there for me. And I'm going to orient my life around that expectation. Not to say that I'm going to just live in rage and disappointment if you fail me, but I'm going to show up and be vulnerable in order to actually allow myself to depend on another human being. Sometimes this idea of having a healthy or positive expectation can even show up in our spiritual practices, things that maybe you would consider like prayer or affirmations or manifestation. See, when we have a dream, some people tend to think that it can be a lot more powerful to actually put some healthy expectation behind that dream, to say, okay, I want to bring this thing into the world, and whether you might pray about it, or you might just have some affirmations or some other practices that you build around this thing you want to bring into the world or this thing you want to create, right? That there are often many instances where it can be healthier for us and even more powerful for us to say, hey, this thing that has been put in my heart, I believe that it's actually out there and that it's possible, and that right now it's just the process of finding it or figuring it out, or maybe it's on its way already, versus the mindset of, I really don't know if this is even possible, I don't know if I'm qualified, I don't know if I can do it, and therefore I have this desire, but I don't even feel like I should. There's a huge difference there, and that is a level of expectation that I think we can bring to our practices. But friends, whether it's that good expectation or that bad expectation, the real question is, what is it that you're waiting for? And when you think about the weight that's going on in your life, is there a healthy expectation around it? Or is it surrounded by shoulds and supposed tos? And sometimes it's not even in our own lives. We're waiting for the world to change, right? We have this anticipation for the world and what's going to happen in the world. And maybe sometimes we have hope that it's getting better, or fear that it's getting worse. And yet the reality of both of those is that we have to embrace some level of unknown, that whether it's hope or fear, we are going to be living in the unknown because we just don't know what the future holds. And as Rachel Held Evans says, to practice Advent is to lean into an unfulfilled promise, to embrace the tension between what is and what could be, and to open ourselves to the possibility of transformation. Friends, we will always find ourselves between what is and between what could be, because so much of life happens in the waiting. And we think about Advent. We think about this arrival, and whatever arrival that you might be hoping for today. Maybe it's a change in your life circumstances. Maybe it's a new job. Maybe it's, emotional healing or healing within a relationship. Or maybe it's larger scale. Maybe you look at the world and you're saying, we're still waiting for the end of war, as we just sung earlier, right? This imagination for a world without war, a world of peace, a world where all are fed, all are taken care of, essentially a world that is unbroken. And yet the question is, whether we're talking about the world or we're talking about your waiting, the question really is, how do we live when we're right in the middle of the now and the not yet? We're living in between those two things. And I love how Walter Brueggemann kind of fleshes out this idea. He says, the beauty of Advent lies in its insistence that what we wait for is already breaking through. We live in the not yet, but we are sustained by glimpses of the already. How many of us, if you really used your imagination, if you went inward, if you looked into your mind's eye, you could see a world that is unbroken. You could see a world that is healed and whole. Right? Even if just utilizing your imaginative capacity. And then moving from there, can we, if we really open our eyes and really pay attention, can we see glimpses and fragments of that world showing up in the here and now? Right? Are there pictures and pieces beginning to form? The ancient Hebrew people have a phrase. They had a phrase, and it's carried through many generations. And this phrase is tikkun olam, and this word tikkun olam essentially translates to repairing the world. It's a recognition that on some level, the world is broken. Now you might define this differently, depending on who you are and the area that you focus on. But I think we can all agree that at least in this human experience, from one level of reality, we can look and we could say, yeah, there are systems that aren't working for everybody, right? There are aspects of our world and our collective life that aren't working, that are broken, that are toxic, right? That are harmful to others, that are harmful to the planet. And so there's this recognition that not only is the world in need of repair, but we are all a part of that repairing work. And throughout history, this phrase to different groups of people who've interpreted this phrase throughout the Jewish culture, it's been sort of interpreted differently throughout time. That there have been times where it really carried a spiritual context, right? Repairing the world spiritually, but there have been other times where it really has been focused on economic justice and economic healing, or social justice and social healing. That this phrase has really remained a mainstay of Jewish spirituality, though it has evolved. And I think what's powerful about it is that there is really an invitation, and you don't have to be Jewish at all to see yourself as part of the repairing of the world, because I think the invitation is for all people to realize, hey, maybe the goal is to get caught up in tikkun olam and the repairing of the world. Maybe the world could look totally different if we all oriented our lives toward that common good, toward that repairing. And maybe the repairing of the world isn't simply about a destination, but a process. There is sort of a verb, a emotion implied here, the repairing of the world, that we are always in that process. And I think that if we look at our lives in terms of process rather than destination, we can find a lot more peace in our experiences. Reverend Holly Whitcomb says, the waiting of Advent teaches us to live in increments, in small pieces rather than large chunks. Waiting also teaches us to measure our progress slowly. So we work ourselves through Advent, dog treat by dog treat, or buff Santa by buff Santa. But reality, we're remembering that life and our lives are really parts of this long process. Our lives are a long process, and we are a part of an even greater process of this planet, of our collective. And I think it could be helpful just to zoom in on our lives for a second, because sometimes it can be really easy to lose sight of the process that we're a part of because we zoom out, right? We don't see the progress and the growth that we've experienced in decades or in terms of years and even months. We zoom in, we hyper-focus on how we're feeling in a single day, and that can be really deceiving. I've made a little graph to help us kind of understand this. This is how I feel on a given day. If you're talking about progress, okay? Am I growing spiritually? Am I becoming the person I want to be? This is what a day feels like. I experience both the highs and lows of what Jake is capable of. Anyone else with me, right? However, if we were to zoom out and look in terms of months or even years, you still see there is some variance, there are some ups and downs, but you also start to notice that there is an arcing and a trending in a particular direction, hopefully upward. But if you were to zoom out even further to decades and even a lifetime's worth of time, what you would notice is that the variances would start to fade away, and you would start to see that upward journey, that transcendence that we are all participating in. And take this out of our lives for a second. Think of this in the context of the world. Now, if we want to look at the world in this context, we probably have to zoom out of years and decades and start looking on the time scale of centuries and millennia. But nonetheless, there is growth and evolution happening. And I think the encouragement here, friends, is may we take our time, may we be patient with ourselves and with others, and maybe remember to zoom out and to see the big picture and not get caught up in how it feels on a given day. To remember that our progress is not going to be judged by a single day and that the process is much bigger. And may we find joy in those little moments, even when we're feeling like we aren't where we want to be, because we know it's a part of something greater. See, friends, I think one of life's secrets is that the divine or God or however you choose to define this, it isn't just going to show up one day, but that it's actually been here the whole time, right? That God, the divine source, whatever your language is, that it's right there in the waiting room. It's right there in the previews, right? It's right there in the car ride over. And so we live in the tension between the now and the not yet, between where we are and where we want to be. And yet so often we get caught up because we tend to say things like, well, I'll be happy when, or I can move forward with my life when this happens. And we forget that perhaps the goal is to thrive in the liminal space, in the in-between. I'll close with this quote from Richard Rohr. He says, Advent is not about waiting for a perfect future, but about discovering the sacred in the imperfections of the present. How many of us know that we've got caught up in this idea of a perfect future? And in a way, we can breathe a sigh of relief, realizing that it's not the point. That the sacred isn't waiting for us behind door number 3. It's right here. It is right now. And maybe one of the most potent images that we have available to us is this ancient story of a baby born amidst the suffering, amidst the difficulties of the world. Not the divine standing outside of life, outside of this ongoing process, but that of the divine entering into tikkun olam, entering into the process that we all are a part of, and reminding us that we too have the power and the possibility to do all the same things, right? To access that same love. So, Aldea, as we wait, as we anticipate the year ahead, may we remember that waiting is not a glitch, it's not a defect, but it is an essential part of the human experience. As we wait for the birth of something new in the world, may we see ourselves as part of Tikkun Olam, the repairing of the world. And may the waiting of this holiday season hold joy and hope for us as we discover the sacred imperfections between the now and the not yet.